He wasn't a hero. He was the leader of a violent insurgency, a master of propaganda who used the poor as a shield for his own brutal war against the state. The man you think you know, the charming rogue in green tights, the noble hero who stole from the rich to give to the poor, is a lie, a carefully constructed, 900-year-old fabrication designed to hide a much darker and more terrifying truth. The cheerful Disney fox, the swashbuckling Errol Flynn, the stoic Kevin Costner, they are all ghosts, puppets in a historical theater of distraction. They were created to make you look the other way, to make you ignore the blood, the decapitations, and the sheer, calculated violence of the real figure lurking in the shadows of Sherwood Forest. The legend of Robin Hood isn't a fairy tale. It's a cover-up. And the man we've been taught to hate for centuries, the Sheriff of Nottingham, might just be the story's most tragic victim. To understand what really happened, we have to ask one burning question. If Robin Hood wasn't the hero, then who was he protecting? And what was the real crime that his legend was invented to conceal? The search for the real Robin Hood begins with a stunning, inconvenient fact. He doesn't exist. At least not in the way we think. Go back to the historical records of the late 12th century, the time of King Richard the Lionheart and his conniving brother John. Search the official chronicles, the court documents, the pipe rolls that meticulously recorded the financial dealings of the English government. You will find no mention of a notorious outlaw named Robin Hood leading a band of merry men in Sherwood. Nothing. It's as if the most famous folk hero in history left no footprint in his own time. The man simply isn't there. His ghost first appears 2 centuries later, not in the dry pages of history, but in the smoky, ale-soaked taverns of 15th century England. He comes to life in ballads, in songs sung for a new generation, a generation that had never known King Richard or King John. And this first Robin Hood is not a nobleman wrongfully dispossessed of his lands. He is not a crusader returning to a stolen kingdom. He is a yeoman, a commoner, a man of the earth, and he is filled with a cold, hard rage. One of the earliest surviving tales is called Robin Hood and the Monk. In it, there is no charity, no noble cause. Robin and his men attend a church service in Nottingham. When a monk recognizes him and raises the alarm, Robin doesn't just escape. He and Little John track the monk down, and without hesitation, Little John draws his sword and slices off the monk's head. Then they stab the young page boy traveling with him, killing him too, simply for crying out. This is not stealing from the rich to give to the poor. This is brutal, cold-blooded murder. In another early ballad, Robin Hood and Guy of Gisborne, Robin encounters a rival bounty hunter. They fight and Robin wins, beheading Sir Guy. He then takes his knife, mutilates the dead man's face beyond recognition, sticks the severed head on the end of his bow, and parades it around as a trophy. He was a figure of terror, a boogeyman the authorities used to scare people into submission. So how did this vicious killer transform into a champion of the people? To understand that, you have to understand the world that created him. You have to understand the suffocating oppression of 12th century England. Imagine living in a conquered nation. A century before our story begins, in 1066, England was invaded and brutally subjugated by the Normans from France. A foreign elite took power, speaking a different language, imposing a different culture, and seizing nearly all the land for themselves. They were an occupying force, and they ruled the native Anglo-Saxons with an iron fist. At the top of this pyramid was the king, a figure who often spent more time in France than in England, viewing the country as little more than a personal cash machine to fund his foreign wars. To fuel this war machine, the Norman kings created a system of laws so oppressive it's almost impossible for us to comprehend today. The most hated of these were the forest laws. Vast swathes of England, up to a third of the entire country, were declared royal forest. This didn't mean it was all trees. It included villages, farms, and entire communities. But within these boundaries, the law was absolute and belonged to the king alone. The animals of the forest, especially the deer, were the king's personal property. If you were a starving peasant, living on land your family had farmed for generations, and you killed a deer to feed your children, the punishment was not a fine. It was blinding, or castration, or hanging. A special police force of foresters patrolled these lands, enforcing the king's will with unchecked brutality. They were judge, jury, and often executioner. This is the world of Robin Hood. Not a magical kingdom of castles and tournaments, but a pressure cooker of resentment and desperation. It was a world where justice was a commodity for the rich, and survival was a crime for the poor. The Sheriff of Nottingham wasn't just a bumbling, greedy villain from a children's story. He was the local enforcer of this brutal system. He was the regional administrator for the foreign king, tasked with collecting crippling taxes from a population that hated him and enforcing laws that starved them. He was a man caught between an absent, demanding monarch and a seething, rebellious populace. He was the face of the oppression, the lightning rod for all the anger and fear. Into this powder keg the idea of an outlaw, a man who defied the forest laws, who lived free in the greenwood, who struck back against the hated authorities, was more than just a story. It was a fantasy of revenge. It was a dream of justice in a world that offered none. The early ballads were not about social equality, they were about a visceral, violent payback. Robin Hood didn't steal from the rich to give to the poor. He stole from the government. He attacked the symbols of Norman power: corrupt abbots, wealthy merchants, and above all, the sheriff and his men. He was a symbol of Anglo-Saxon defiance against their French-speaking overlords. He was the embodiment of a fantasy where the oppressed finally had a champion ruthless enough to fight back on their own terms. The forest itself, Sherwood, was not a friendly park. It was a dark, dangerous, and sprawling wilderness, a perfect sanctuary for someone on the run. It was a place outside of society's control, a labyrinth of ancient oaks and tangled undergrowth where the king's law was difficult, if not impossible, to enforce. For a peasant, the forest was a place of terror, representing the king's oppressive power. But for an outlaw, it was a fortress. It provided food if you were brave enough to break the law and hunt. It provided shelter. And most importantly, it provided a tactical advantage against any force the sheriff could send after you. Living in the greenwood was an act of open rebellion. It was a declaration that you no longer recognized the authority of the state. So we have the birth of a legend, not a real man but a powerful idea. An idea forged in the crucible of conquest, starvation, and injustice. The first Robin Hood was a specter of vengeance, a brutal answer to a brutal time. He was the hero the common people needed, not because he was good, but because he was effective. He was the fear they wished they could instill in their oppressors. But this still doesn't explain the transformation. It doesn't explain how this murderous, vengeful phantom of the forest became the clean, noble, and righteous hero we know today. The original story is one of class warfare, of violent Saxon resistance against Norman tyranny. The story we have now is a sanitized romance. Somewhere along the line, the entire point of the legend was hijacked. The raw, angry soul of the original story was ripped out and replaced with something far more palatable, far less revolutionary. The question is, who did it and why? The answer lies not with kings or sheriffs, but with the storytellers themselves, and the powerful political forces that realized a violent outlaw could be reshaped into the most powerful propaganda tool of all. To understand how this happened, you have to travel back in time. Not to the 12th century of King Richard and Prince John, but to the 14th and 15th centuries, when the first whispers of Robin Hood began to circulate. These weren't grand, leather-bound books written for aristocrats. They were gritty, violent, and often anonymous ballads, sung in taverns and recited at firesides by a population seething with discontent. Forget the dashing Errol Flynn or the noble Kevin Costner. The original Robin Hood of these early tales is a far more terrifying and ambiguous figure. He is not a dispossessed nobleman. There is no mention of the Earl of Huntingdon, no tragic backstory of being cheated out of his lands. This first Robin is a yeoman, and that single word changes everything. A yeoman in medieval England was a man of the middle. He wasn't a serf bound to the land, but he wasn't a knight or a lord either. He was a free man, often a small landowner, a skilled archer, a craftsman. He was the backbone of the English army and the English economy, yet he was constantly being squeezed by the corrupt church, greedy officials, and the iron fist of the aristocracy. The yeoman was a man with something to lose, and a deep-seated resentment for the system that threatened to take it. This is the world that gives birth to Robin Hood. The earliest surviving detailed stories like A Jest of Robin Hood and Robin Hood and the Monk paint a picture not of a revolutionary, but of a hardened outlaw living on his own terms. His primary motivation isn't charity. It's survival, profit, and a very personal, very violent form of justice. In these tales, he doesn't steal from the rich and give to the poor. That famous motto doesn't appear for another 200 years. Instead, the original Robin Hood and his men rob from the overfed, corrupt clergy, fat abbots and monks who symbolize the church's immense wealth and hypocrisy. They prey on merchants and anyone traveling through Sherwood Forest who looks like they have a full purse. And they hold a special murderous hatred for the agents of the law, specifically the Sheriff of Nottingham. The violence is shocking and casual. In one of the oldest ballads, Robin Hood and Guy of Gisborne, Robin encounters a bounty hunter sent to kill him. After a brutal archery duel and sword fight, Robin wins. But he doesn't just kill Sir Guy. He decapitates him, sticks his head on the tip of his bow, and then horribly mutilates his face with a knife until he's unrecognizable. He then puts on Sir Guy's clothes as a disguise. This isn't heroic behavior. It's the brutal act of a desperate man in a kill-or-be-killed world. His merry men are not a band of cheerful rebels fighting for a cause. They are a gang. Little John, for example, isn't just a loyal sidekick. In one story, he gets into an argument with Robin and quits the band, only to be captured. When Robin rescues him, their first act is to find the monk who betrayed Little John, and they murder him. Not in a fight. They just kill him and his young page, who had the misfortune of being with him. This is a gangland execution, not a noble crusade. So why did people love these stories? Why did they sing the praises of a violent, self-interested killer? Because he was their killer. He was the embodiment of their rage. In a world where the law was a weapon used by the rich against the poor, Robin Hood represented a fantasy of flipping the script. He was the common man with the power to strike back. When he humiliates the Sheriff of Nottingham, the audience felt a vicarious thrill. When he robs a greedy abbot, it was a symbolic reclaiming of wealth from a corrupt institution that demanded tithes from the poor while its leaders lived in luxury. These stories were a pressure valve for a society on the brink of collapse. The 14th century saw the Black Death wipe out nearly half the population, leading to massive labor shortages and social upheaval. Peasants and yeomen began demanding better wages and more rights, culminating in the massive Peasants' Revolt of 1381, where an army of commoners marched on London, executing the Archbishop of Canterbury and the king's treasurer. The name Robin Hood was actually used as a pseudonym by rebels during this and other uprisings. He wasn't just a story. He was a symbol of defiance. He was the outlaw they wished they could be. This is the critical point. The original Robin Hood was a hero of the common people, not a hero for them. He didn't serve them. He reflected them. His anger was their anger. His violence was their fantasy. And for the authorities, this was incredibly dangerous. A story that celebrated killing sheriffs and robbing the church was not just entertainment. It was sedition. It was fuel for rebellion. For over a century, the ruling classes tried to suppress these ballads, but they were too popular, too deeply embedded in the culture. You can't kill a story that people want to believe in. So, if you can't beat them, you join them. Or, more accurately, you hijack their story and change it from the inside out. The transformation began subtly, around the turn of the 16th century. A new class of writers and thinkers began to get their hands on the legend. One of the first and most influential was a Scottish historian named John Mair. In his History of Greater Britain, published in 1521, he writes about the Robin Hood tales, but he adds a new revolutionary twist. He places the story firmly during the reign of King Richard the Lionheart, and describes Robin not as a common yeoman, but as a man of noble birth, a dispossessed earl driven to the forest by the tyranny of Prince John. This was a seismic shift. It's the first time this idea ever appears in writing. Why make this change? Because it completely defangs the legend. A common yeoman fighting a corrupt system is a revolutionary. He's a threat to the entire social order. But a nobleman fighting to restore the rightful king to the throne? That's not a revolutionary. That's a loyalist. By making Robin an aristocrat, Mair and the writers who followed him transformed the story from one of class warfare into one of a squabble within the ruling class. The enemy was no longer the system itself, the corrupt sheriffs, the greedy abbots, the oppressive laws. The enemy was now a single bad ruler, Prince John. The implication was that the system was fine. It just needed the right nobleman at the top. Robin was no longer fighting against the aristocracy. He was fighting to restore its proper order. This new version was infinitely safer. It was palatable to the upper classes. They could now enjoy the romance and adventure of the outlaw story, without endorsing the uncomfortable message of popular rebellion. The raw, violent yeoman was being sanded down, polished, and gentrified. He was being given a pedigree. And with this single change, the door was open for a complete reinvention. The addition of Maid Marian as a high-born love interest further cemented his new noble status. The random acts of robbery and violence were slowly replaced with a more structured, ideological mission. This is where the idea of robbing from the rich to give to the poor finally begins to emerge, turning his crimes into acts of social justice rather than personal gain. The outlaw was being laundered, his criminal record expunged and replaced with a heroic resume. The propaganda machine was just warming up. The original dangerous Robin of the ballads was being systematically erased, replaced by a more convenient, more controllable, and ultimately more marketable hero. The yeoman was dead. In his place stood a nobleman. But this was just the beginning. To become a true national icon, Robin Hood needed more than a new backstory. He needed a stage, an audience, and a queen who understood the immense power of a good story. And Queen Elizabeth I understood power better than almost anyone. She inherited a fractured kingdom, torn apart by religious strife and threatened by the Catholic superpowers of Europe. To survive, she needed to unite her people. She needed to forge a new English identity, a national soul. And you don't do that with laws and armies alone. You do it with stories. Elizabeth's reign was the golden age of English literature for a reason. It was a state-sponsored project of myth-making, and Robin Hood was about to get the starring role. The stage and the audience he needed arrived in the form of a revolutionary technology, the printing press. For centuries, the Robin Hood ballads were passed down orally, changing with every telling, confined to a single village or region. But now, for the first time, these stories could be mass-produced. Cheap pamphlets and collections of songs called garlands began to flood the market. Suddenly, the Outlaw of Sherwood wasn't just a local legend. He was a national celebrity. Everyone from a London merchant to a farmer in Kent could buy his adventures for a penny and read them by candlelight. This was the first great media explosion, and Robin Hood went viral 16th century style. But print was just the beginning. The real transformation happened in the rowdy, bustling, and wildly popular theaters of Elizabethan London. This was the age of Shakespeare, a time when plays weren't just entertainment. They were the internet, the cable news, and the blockbuster cinema of their day, all rolled into one. And in 1598, a playwright named Anthony Munday did for Robin Hood what a blockbuster movie does for a comic book character today. He gave him a definitive, epic origin story. Munday wrote 2 plays, The Downfall of Robert, Earl of Huntingdon, and The Death of Robert, Earl of Huntingdon. And right there in the title, the change is complete. He's not Robin the yeoman anymore. He is Robert, Earl of Huntingdon. Munday took the vague hints of nobility that had been floating around and chiseled them into canon. In his version, Robin is a true blue aristocrat, a powerful lord who is betrayed by his enemies at court, stripped of his lands and title, and outlawed by the corrupt Prince John, while the true king, Richard the Lionheart, is away on crusade. So he retreats to the forest, not as a common thief, but as a nobleman in exile, a rightful ruler creating a shadow kingdom based on justice and loyalty. His men aren't just a band of roughnecks, they are loyal retainers following their rightful lord. It's a brilliant piece of literary alchemy. The story is no longer about a peasant rising up against his masters. It's about a master trying to reclaim his rightful place from other wicked masters. But why the upgrade? Why turn a working-class hero into a lord? The answer is pure political genius. The peasant revolutionary is dangerous. He questions the very structure of society. He suggests that the common man can and should take power for himself. For a monarch like Queen Elizabeth, who had to constantly worry about rebellions and plots, that's a terrifying message to have playing in theaters across your capital city. But a wronged nobleman? That's a much safer story. It reinforces the system instead of tearing it down. The problem isn't the aristocracy itself. It's just a few bad apples within it, like the Sheriff of Nottingham or Prince John. The story now says that the system is fundamentally good. It just needs the right nobleman, the good king, to be in charge. Robin Hood, the Earl of Huntingdon, isn't fighting to overthrow the crown. He's fighting to protect it for the true king, Richard. He's the ultimate loyal subject, an aristocrat cleaning up the mess made by other, less honorable aristocrats. It was a version of the legend that the nobility could watch and applaud, feeling secure in their power, while the common folk could still cheer for the outlaw hero fighting for the little guy. It was the perfect piece of propaganda. And with a noble hero, you need a noble love interest. This is where Maid Marian truly steps into the spotlight. In the early ballads, she's barely a footnote. But in Monday's plays, she becomes central to the entire plot. She is Matilda, Lord Fitzwalter's daughter, a beautiful highborn lady who is Robin's true love. When he is outlawed, she refuses to abandon him. She follows him into the forest, renames herself Maid Marian, and becomes the queen of his woodland court. This addition was a masterstroke. It instantly raises the stakes. Robin isn't just fighting for justice anymore. He's fighting for love. It adds romance, passion, and tragedy, making the story far more appealing to a broad audience. Marian isn't just a damsel in distress either. In these Elizabethan versions, she's often portrayed as a capable and fierce figure in her own right, skilled with a bow, a true partner to Robin. Their love story becomes a symbol of loyalty and defiance against a corrupt world. The rest of the merry men got an upgrade too. They weren't just a random collection of outlaws anymore. They became a structured society, a sort of Camelot in the Greenwood, with Robin as their king and Marian as their queen. Friar Tuck becomes his chaplain, Little John his loyal lieutenant. Each character is given a clearer role, a more distinct personality. The plays turned a loose collection of folk tales into a cohesive, character-driven saga. They created a world that audiences could invest in, a fantasy of a better, fairer England hidden away in the deep woods. This new aristocratic, romantic Robin Hood was an incredible success. It was the version that solidified in the public imagination, the version that was printed and reprinted, performed and reperformed. It was a hero tailor-made for Elizabethan England, a patriot loyal to the true crown, an embodiment of Old English virtues of courage, justice, and fair play, all while being safely contained within the existing class structure. He was a rebel who, paradoxically, reinforced the authority of the monarchy. He fought the man, but he did it in the name of the real man, the king. This taming of Robin Hood was essential for his survival. If he had remained the raw, violent peasant of the early ballads, he might have been suppressed as a dangerous and seditious figure. Instead, he was adopted by the establishment, polished up, and turned into a national mascot. He became a symbol not of revolution, but of restoration, the desire to return to a mythical golden age of justice under a rightful king. The yeoman archer who haunted the nightmares of medieval sheriffs was gone. In his place stood a romantic hero, a tragic earl fighting for his love and his king. The legend had been made safe, respectable, and profoundly patriotic. It had been given a grand stage and a rapturous audience, and it had been woven into the very fabric of England's story about itself. But the process of myth-making is never finished. A story this powerful doesn't belong to one era. As the age of queens and playwrights gave way to an age of revolution, science, and industry, the world would once again look to the man in Lincoln Green, and they would ask new, more dangerous questions about what it truly means to rob from the rich and give to the poor. The polished nobleman of the Elizabethan stage was about to face his next great trial, not in Sherwood Forest, but in the pages of radical pamphlets and the minds of a new generation dreaming of liberty. And that dream of liberty would soon be paid for in blood. As the 17th century dawned, the world that had created Robin Hood was tearing itself apart. The old certainties of king, church, and state were being thrown into the fire. In England, this wasn't just a philosophical debate, it was the English Civil War. A bloody, decade-long conflict that pitted Parliament against the king, brother against brother. A war that would end with something previously unthinkable: the execution of a reigning monarch, King Charles I. So where does a man famously loyal to the crown stand when the crown itself is on trial? This was the great crisis for the Robin Hood legend. His entire identity was wrapped up in loyalty to a good king, Richard the Lionheart, while fighting the tyranny of a bad regent, Prince John. But what happens when the system itself is the problem? What if the tyranny comes not from a bad prince, but from the very concept of monarchy? Suddenly, Robin's loyalty to the crown became inconvenient, a liability. The story had to adapt or it would die. And so writers and balladeers began a radical reimagining. They started to quietly file off the serial numbers of his royalist past. King Richard's name was mentioned less and less. The focus shifted away from restoring a rightful king and zoomed in on the core of his actions: resistance to unjust authority. He was no longer just a disgruntled nobleman. He was becoming something far more dangerous, far more powerful. a symbol of the common man's right to fight back. He was now a proto-republican, a man who believed that the authority of the law came from the consent of the people, not the divine right of a king. The Sheriff of Nottingham was no longer just a corrupt local official. He became an agent of a tyrannical state, a symbol of an oppressive government levying unfair taxes on hard-working people. Does that sound familiar? It should, because this new radicalized Robin Hood was about to set sail for the New World. As tensions flared between Great Britain and its American colonies in the 18th century, the legend of Robin Hood found its most fertile ground yet. The American colonists saw their own struggle reflected perfectly in the Greenwood tales. They saw King George III as a new Prince John, a distant, out-of-touch monarch imposing his will without care or concern. They saw the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, and the Intolerable Acts as the modern equivalent of the sheriff's crippling taxes. The colonists weren't just reading about Robin Hood, they were living it. Think about the slogan that defined an entire revolution: no taxation without representation. What is that, if not the political philosophy of Robin Hood, distilled into 5 powerful words? It's the argument that you have the right to resist a power that takes from you without your consent. The Sons of Liberty, meeting in secret, planning their resistance, were a new band of merry men. The Boston Tea Party wasn't just a protest. It was a raid, an act of defiance straight out of a Sherwood Forest playbook, targeting the gold of the oppressor. This is where the legend becomes deeply embedded in the American psyche. Robin Hood wasn't just some quaint English folk tale anymore. He was a spiritual forefather of the Revolution. He was the outlaw spirit that justified taking up arms against the most powerful empire on earth. He was the moral permission slip for a group of colonies to declare their independence. He was the ultimate patriot who proves his love for his country by defying its government. But let's pause here and look through the eyes of the other side. Through the eyes of the British Crown. To them, the Sons of Liberty weren't heroes. They were seditious traitors. George Washington wasn't a noble general. He was the leader of a criminal insurrection. And this new version of Robin Hood they so admired? He was the poster boy for anarchy and rebellion. This brings us right back to our central question: hero or criminal? In this revolutionary age, the answer depends entirely on which side of the Atlantic you're standing on. To the American patriot, Robin Hood is a hero of the highest order, a freedom fighter. To the British loyalist, he is a criminal, a thief, and a terrorist, undermining the rule of law and the stability of the nation. His actions haven't changed. He is still an outlaw living outside the law, taking what is not his, and using violence to achieve his aims. What has changed is the scale. He's no longer just a local nuisance to a single sheriff. He is now an ideological threat to an entire system of governance. His enemy is no longer a man but an idea, the idea that some are born to rule and others are born to obey. This is the Robin Hood of the Enlightenment, a rational rebel fighting not just for a square meal for a starving peasant, but for abstract concepts like liberty, justice, and natural rights. The forest of Sherwood has expanded to become a wilderness of political philosophy. His bow and arrow are no longer just weapons. They are symbols of the individual's right to bear arms against a tyrannical state, a concept that would be written directly into the American Bill of Rights. This transformation is profound. The simple social bandit of the medieval ballads has become a full-blown political revolutionary. He's a more complex, more dangerous figure. He forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. When does breaking the law become the right thing to do? When is rebellion justified? And who gets to decide? The people with the power, or the people with the moral high ground? The legend had survived its greatest test. It had navigated the fall of kings and the rise of republics. It had proven it could be more than just a story about a man in green tights. It could be a living, breathing argument for freedom itself. But as the smoke cleared from the battlefields of the American Revolution and the French Revolution, a new world was being born. A world not of castles and kings, but of factories and smokestacks. The 19th century and the Industrial Revolution would present a new kind of tyranny. The new villain wasn't a nobleman demanding taxes, but a factory owner demanding 12-hour days for pennies. The new form of poverty wasn't a bad harvest, but the crushing, anonymous squalor of the urban slum. The new sheriff was not a man, but an economic system. How could a hero of the Greenwood, a man of nature and simple justice, possibly fight an enemy as vast and impersonal as industrial capitalism? Robin Hood was about to face a foe he couldn't simply rob, an injustice he couldn't fix with an arrow. The forest was shrinking, and the age of the machine was about to test the legend in ways it had never been tested before. The first to go were the ancient oaks, the ones that had stood for centuries, their branches intertwined like the gnarled hands of old men telling stories. They fell not to the woodsman's axe for a winter fire, but to the surveyor's chain and the relentless logic of the grid. The sound of Sherwood Forest was no longer the snap of a twig under a deer's hoof or the whisper of wind through leaves. It was the rhythmic groan of the saw, the distant shriek of a steam whistle, and the percussive clang of hammers on iron rails. The enemy was no longer a man in a castle. The enemy was a line on a map. This was the enclosure movement, a quiet, bureaucratic violence that redrew the soul of England. For generations, the forests and commons were the people's birthright. A place to graze a cow, gather firewood, forage for food. It was the social safety net of the medieval world. Now stone walls and hedgerows sliced through the land, declaring in stark, unyielding terms, "This is mine. You are not welcome." The very ground beneath Robin Hood's feet was being privatized, sold, and tamed. How do you fight a deed? How do you put an arrow through a law? The Sheriff of Nottingham could be defied, his tax collectors ambushed. But this new sheriff was the inexorable march of progress itself, a foe with 1,000 faces and none at all. The poor, pushed off their ancestral lands, didn't find a new Greenwood. They found the dark, satanic mills of the industrial city. They traded the tyranny of the Lord for the tyranny of the clock. Instead of the seasons, their lives were now governed by the factory bell. They were crammed into sprawling slums where the air was thick with coal smoke and the water ran foul with disease. And the rich were richer than ever. Not landed gentry with castles, but a new breed. Industrialists, factory owners, men who measured their wealth not in acres, but in output, in tonnage, in the sheer brutal efficiency of human labor converted into capital. They didn't steal a peasant's last pig. They stole his daylight, his health, his future, all while paying him a wage that was just enough to keep him alive to work tomorrow. In this grim new reality, the legend of Robin Hood didn't die. It ignited. It became a desperate dream, a nostalgic cry for a world that was being systematically dismantled. The storytellers, poets, and writers of the Romantic era seized upon him. They looked at the smoke-choked cities and the dehumanizing factories, and they looked back to the Greenwood with a powerful, aching longing. For them, Robin Hood was no longer just a clever rogue. He was the spirit of a lost England. He was the embodiment of natural liberty against the artificial constraints of industrial society. He was the organic, living forest pushing back against the cold, dead iron of the machine. Think of writers like Thomas Love Peacock, whose 1822 novel Maid Marian presented a swashbuckling, idealized Robin Hood fighting for an idyllic, pre-industrial merry old England. This wasn't a gritty, historical account. It was a fantasy, a necessary one. It was a story that told its readers, "Remember the sun on your face? Remember the freedom of the woods? That is your true heritage, not this soot-stained brick." The antiquarian Joseph Ritson painstakingly collected the old ballads, not just as historical curiosities, but as vital pieces of a vanishing culture. He presented Robin Hood as a true Saxon hero, a champion of the common Anglo-Saxon people against their oppressive Norman, and by extension aristocratic overlords. In an age of stark class division, this narrative resonated like a thunderclap. The ballad, the very medium of the legend, found a new ferocious life. The old songs were sung again, but this time, the rhythm wasn't for dancing on the village green. It was for marching. It was for protesting. Imagine a dimly lit pub in Manchester or Sheffield, packed with factory workers, their faces pale with exhaustion and coal dust. Someone starts to sing a verse of A Jest of Robin Hood. The room falls quiet, then joins in. The song is no longer about a distant past. It's about right now. The greedy abbot is the factory owner. The cruel sheriff is the magistrate who jails men for forming a union. The king is a distant government that serves the interests of the wealthy. Sherwood Forest isn't a place you can run to anymore. It's a state of mind, a kingdom of defiance you build in your heart. And this is where the question hero or criminal becomes more charged than ever before. To the Victorian industrialist, to the politician in parliament, to the new police forces patrolling the cities, this new Robin Hood was an absolute menace. He was the spirit of Luddism, the machine-breaking movement that terrified the establishment. He was the specter of revolution haunting Europe. He represented chaos, a rejection of property rights, a dangerous nostalgia that stood in the way of Britain's glorious industrial destiny. To them, celebrating Robin Hood was tantamount to treason. It was an incitement to riot, an attack on the very foundations of law, order, and economic progress. He was, in their eyes, the ultimate criminal, an idea that could not be jailed. But to the man working a 14-hour shift, to the woman watching her children cough in the smog, to the family evicted from their farm, he was more of a hero than William the Conqueror or King Richard ever could be. He was proof that the system wasn't inevitable. He was a symbol that human dignity was worth more than a profit margin. He was the promise that even when faced with an overwhelming impersonal force, one person could still stand up and say, "This is wrong." The crime, in their view, wasn't stealing from the rich. The crime was the system that created such obscene wealth alongside such desperate poverty in the first place. The legend was forced to evolve. The bow and arrow were no longer literal weapons, they were metaphors. The bow was the tension between the powerful and the powerless. The arrow was the truth, aimed directly at the heart of injustice. Robin Hood could no longer solve the problem by redistributing a single carriage load of gold. The problem was the entire economic engine. So, he became something far more potent than a man. He became an ideology. He was the ghost in the machine, the green shoot cracking through the pavement. He was the wild, untamable spirit of humanity refusing to be turned into just another cog. The Industrial Revolution tried to pave over Sherwood Forest, but in doing so, it planted its seeds everywhere. The legend had escaped the woods and was now loose in the world, more powerful and more dangerous than ever. It was about to be picked up by thinkers and revolutionaries who would see in this simple English outlaw the blueprint for changing the entire world. For centuries, the legend of Robin Hood was a living, breathing thing. It was fluid, passed down by word of mouth, changing with every singer, in every tavern, around every campfire. A verse might be added here, a character tweaked there. He was a creature of folklore, as wild and untamable as Sherwood Forest itself. But then a machine arrived that would change everything. The printing press. In the late 1400s, for the first time, the scattered ballads were collected, curated, and stamped onto paper. A long poem called A Jest of Robin Hood became the definitive edition, the first canon of the outlaw's story. Suddenly, Robin wasn't just a local legend anymore. He was literature. He could be bought, sold, and most importantly, distributed far beyond the greenwood. The outlaw had been captured, not by the sheriff, but by ink and paper. And this new standardized version of the hero was about to be co-opted by the most powerful people in the land. The Tudors, the dynasty of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, were masters of propaganda. They were a new royal house, and they needed to cement their legitimacy. They did this by creating a powerful new narrative of English history, a story of destiny and greatness, and they needed heroes to populate it. And who was a more popular English hero than Robin Hood? So they performed a stunning act of political jujitsu. They took the nation's most famous anti-government figure and made him part of the government's pageantry. May Day festivals, which had long been rowdy, pagan-tinged celebrations featuring Robin Hood, were formalized and embraced by the court. King Henry VIII himself, a monarch known for his absolute power and ruthless suppression of dissent, once famously burst into the Queen's chambers dressed as Robin Hood, his royal guards trailing behind as his merry men. Think about the irony. The ultimate symbol of authority, a king who could order a man's execution on a whim, was play-acting as the ultimate symbol of rebellion. It was a brilliant move. By embracing Robin Hood, the Tudors defanged him. They turned the outlaw from a threat into a mascot. He was no longer a symbol of the common man's anger against the nobility. He was a quaint piece of English heritage, a fun character for the king to dress up as. The criminal was being domesticated, turned into a court jester. But as the ruling class absorbed the legend, they also began to change it. The Robin Hood of the early ballads was a yeoman, a commoner, a farmer, a man of the earth. He was tough, gritty, and sometimes brutally violent. He was one of the people. But this wasn't a hero the upper classes, now reading his adventures in printed books and watching them in London theaters, could easily identify with. A peasant leading an uprising? That was a terrifying thought. So the story began to shift. In the late 1500s, a playwright named Anthony Munday wrote a series of plays that would forever alter the legend's DNA. For the first time, Monday gave Robin Hood a noble backstory. He wasn't just Robin of the Hood. He was Robert, Earl of Huntingdon, a nobleman who had been cheated out of his lands and title by the corrupt Prince John while the true king, Richard the Lionheart, was away at the Crusades. This was a revolutionary retcon, completely changed the stakes. Robin was no longer a criminal trying to tear down the social order. He was a wronged aristocrat trying to restore it. His fight wasn't against the system of nobility itself. It was against a few bad apples who were abusing that system. He wasn't trying to get rid of kings and lords. He was fighting to put the rightful king back on the throne. This new blue-blooded Robin Hood was far more palatable, far more heroic, to the wealthy patrons of the arts. His rebellion was now justified, not by a radical desire for social equality, but by a conservative desire to reclaim his own property and status. And with his nobility came a new code of conduct. The rough-and-tumble outlaw of the ballads was polished into a chivalrous knight of the forest. This is where Maid Marian, who was barely a footnote in the early tales, is elevated to a central character, his noble love interest. The story transforms from a gritty tale of class warfare into a romantic adventure. And it was this version of the legend, the noble dispossessed Earl of Huntingdon fighting a corrupt temporary government, that was perfectly positioned to become a global symbol of revolution. Because as the 17th and 18th centuries dawned, the world was entering the Age of Enlightenment. Thinkers across Europe and America were grappling with radical new ideas about rights, liberty, and the very nature of government. Philosophers like John Locke argued that citizens have a social contract with their rulers. People agree to be governed, but only if the government agrees to protect their natural rights, life, liberty, and property. If a ruler breaks that contract, if they become a tyrant, then the people have not only a right but a duty to resist. And who was the perfect poster boy for this philosophy? A wronged nobleman, stripped of his property, fighting an unjust, tyrannical regent. Robin Hood became the living embodiment of Locke's theories. He wasn't a mere criminal. He was a citizen enforcing the broken social contract. He wasn't stealing. He was reappropriating wealth from a government that had stolen it from the people in the first place. The Sheriff of Nottingham was no longer just a local villain. He was the symbol of an overreaching, illegitimate state. Sherwood Forest became a state of nature, a place of freedom where true, natural law reigned supreme, outside the corrupting influence of the court. This intellectual reframing turned Robin Hood from an English folk hero into a universal political parable. And that parable was about to cross the Atlantic and help ignite the fires of a revolution. To the American colonists in the 1770s, the story of Robin Hood felt startlingly familiar. They saw their own plight reflected in his legend. They were loyal English subjects, but they were being ruled by a distant king, King George III, who they saw as a tyrant. They were being crushed by unjust taxes imposed by a corrupt parliament, their own Sheriff of Nottingham. The Stamp Act, the Tea Act, these were the arbitrary decrees of their Prince John. When the colonists cried no taxation without representation, they were echoing Robin Hood's defiance. They too felt they had been stripped of their rights and property as Englishmen. So they embraced him as their own. Pamphleteers and rabble-rousers used his name. Ballads were rewritten with American heroes cast in Robin Hood's mold. The Sons of Liberty, meeting in secret under Liberty trees, saw themselves as a new band of merry men, hiding in their own modern-day Sherwood. When they disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians to dump tea into Boston Harbor, they were channeling the spirit of Robin Hood's clever tricks and disguises, using guerrilla tactics against a powerful occupying force. The legend provided a moral and historical justification for treason. They weren't criminals committing sedition against their king. No, they were patriots like the noble Earl of Huntingdon, fighting to restore their rightful liberties from a corrupt and tyrannical government. The Outlaw of Sherwood Forest had become a founding father of the United States. He was a symbol not of English folklore, but of the universal right to fight for freedom. The legend had been transformed from a campfire story into a political weapon, one that helped create a new nation. But even as America was claiming him as a political rebel back in Europe, the story was about to take another, even more dramatic turn. The Age of Revolution was about to give way to the Age of Romance, which would forge the swashbuckling, dashing romantic hero we recognize today. The world was changing. The smoke of industry was beginning to choke the skies of Europe, and in the shadow of the factory, a new kind of thinking began to bloom. It was a rebellion not of muskets and guillotines, but of the human heart. The Romantics, as they came to be called, rejected the cold, hard logic of the Enlightenment. They craved passion, mystery, and emotion. They looked at a wild, overgrown forest not as a resource to be tamed and timbered, but as a sacred space, a cathedral of nature that held a truth deeper than any political pamphlet. They weren't interested in a calculated rebel fighting for abstract rights. They were searching for a hero who embodied the untamed spirit of the individual against a corrupt and soul-crushing system. And in their search for this perfect, passionate hero, they looked back into the misty, half-forgotten past. They looked to the Middle Ages, and there, waiting in the green shadows of Sherwood, they found Robin Hood. But the Robin Hood of the old ballads, the tough, sometimes brutal yeoman who'd crack a man's crown with his staff and laugh about it, he wasn't quite what they were looking for. He was too rough, too common. The Romantics needed a hero with a tragic backstory, a noble heart, and a love worth fighting for. They needed to elevate him, and in 1819 one of the most popular writers on the planet did exactly that, and in doing so he would forever change the legend. His name was Sir Walter Scott. Scott was a literary rock star, the J.K. Rowling or Stephen King of his day. His historical novels were blockbuster events, and his 1819 masterpiece Ivanhoe was his Sgt. Pepper's. It was a sweeping epic of chivalry, knights, damsels in distress, and epic battles. And deep within this story of Saxon knights and Norman lords, Scott placed a charismatic, swashbuckling archer who commanded a band of loyal followers. He called him Locksley, but everyone knew exactly who he was. Sir Walter Scott didn't just include Robin Hood in his story. He gave him a total top-to-bottom makeover. And the first thing he did was solve the legend's biggest historical problem: its timeline. For centuries, nobody could agree on when Robin Hood lived. Was it during the reign of King Edward? King Henry? Scott swept all that confusion aside. With the immense authority of his talent, he definitively placed Robin Hood in one of the most dramatic periods of English history: the reign of King Richard the Lionheart. This was a stroke of narrative genius. Suddenly, the story had a high-stakes, national conflict at its core. You have the good, heroic King Richard, off fighting in the Crusades, a symbol of true English valor. And back home, you have his treacherous, greedy brother, Prince John, bleeding the country dry with the help of his ruthless Norman barons. Robin Hood was no longer just a local outlaw fighting a greedy abbot or a corrupt sheriff. He was now a patriot, a freedom fighter holding the line, keeping the flame of justice alive until the true king returned. The stakes were raised from a stolen purse of gold to the very soul of the nation. But Scott's most radical change was to Robin Hood's identity. The early ballads are clear. Robin is a yeoman, a commoner, a man of the people. Scott looked at that and thought, no, that's not romantic enough. In Ivanhoe, his Robin Hood, this Locksley, is revealed to be none other than Robin of Locksley, a dispossessed Saxon nobleman. He wasn't born a peasant. He was a lord who had his lands and title unjustly stolen by the Normans. Think about what this does to the story. Completely reframes his motive. He isn't stealing from the rich because he's a commoner fighting an unjust class system. He's stealing from the rich because they are the Norman invaders who stole from him first. His rebellion becomes a quest for personal restoration, a fight to reclaim his birthright. It makes him a far more respectable hero for the book-buying audiences of the 19th century. He's not a social revolutionary trying to upend the system. He's a conservative trying to restore the rightful order. He's one of them, an aristocrat just down on his luck. This single change, from yeoman to nobleman, also plugged the story into the great theme of Ivanhoe, the conflict between the native Saxons and the invading Normans. Robin became the ultimate Saxon hero, fighting for the old ways, for the true freeborn English people against foreign tyrants. This resonated powerfully, creating a myth of national identity that was irresistible. And with this new, noble identity came a new personality. Scott's Robin Hood is dashing, chivalrous, and impeccably honorable. He's the guy who shows up at the archery tournament in disguise and with a flick of his wrist, splits his opponent's arrow down the middle, not just to win, but to make a grand theatrical statement. He is the image of effortless cool. This is where the swashbuckling hero of the silver screen is truly born. The gritty, dangerous outlaw of the ballads was sanded down, polished, and given a code of honor that a knight would recognize. This romantic reinvention was so incredibly popular, so compelling, that it almost completely erased what came before. Ivanhoe was a global phenomenon. It was translated into dozens of languages. Everyone read it. And for generations afterward, Scott's version was the Robin Hood story. Writers, poets, and playwrights who followed didn't go back to the medieval ballads for their inspiration. They went to Ivanhoe. The idea of Robin as the noble Saxon lord, fighting for King Richard against Prince John, became canon. It was set in stone. This new romanticized hero was a perfect fit for the Victorian era that followed. The Victorians loved a clear moral compass. They wanted heroes who were unimpeachably good, and a dispossessed nobleman fighting for his king and country was a much more comfortable hero than a common thief, no matter how justified. They latched onto the romantic elements Scott had woven in. The love story with Maid Marian, who was now definitively a noblewoman herself, Lady Marian Fitzwalter, became central to the plot. Their love was pure, chaste, and a symbol of the union of Saxon and Norman, the healing of a divided nation. Across the Atlantic, this version of Robin Hood found fertile ground in the young United States. Americans had their own foundation myth of fighting a tyrannical, distant king. They understood the impulse to forge a new identity in the wilderness. Robin Hood, the gentleman outlaw who stood for liberty against an unjust government, was a character they instinctively understood. He wasn't just an English hero anymore. He was a universal symbol of freedom. He was the rugged individualist, the man who answered to his own conscience, living free under the greenwood tree. It was an idea that mapped perfectly onto the American frontier mythos. Through the power of one blockbuster novel, Robin Hood had been transformed. He was now more noble, more patriotic, more romantic, and more famous than ever before. He was a certified global superstar. Sir Walter Scott had taken a murky folk legend and forged it into a modern myth, giving it the structure and characters that we still recognize in almost every movie and TV show today. He gave us the dashing hero in green tights, the noble love interest, and the epic struggle for the fate of a kingdom. But in this transformation, in turning a man of the people into a fallen prince, was something essential lost? In making Robin Hood acceptable for the drawing rooms of high society, did Scott inadvertently strip away the raw, dangerous, and truly revolutionary spirit that gave birth to the legend in the first place? That revolutionary spirit didn't die, just went into hiding, waiting for a new century and a new kind of magic. A magic made of light and shadow, projected onto a silver screen. As the Victorian age gave way to the 20th century, the legend of Robin Hood found its most powerful amplifier yet: Hollywood. The printing press had made him a national hero. The motion picture would make him a global icon. And the first man to truly bring the outlaw to life in this new medium was a king in his own right, Hollywood's King Douglas Fairbanks. In 1922, Fairbanks released his silent epic, simply titled Robin Hood. This wasn't just a movie, it was a spectacle. It was one of the most expensive films ever made at the time, with castle sets so vast they were the talk of the industry. But it was Fairbanks himself who defined this new Robin. He wasn't the grim, desperate yeoman of the early ballads. He was an acrobat, a stuntman, a force of pure kinetic energy. He leaped from balconies, slid down tapestries, and battled foes with an infectious, toothy grin. This was Robin Hood reimagined as an American ideal. Optimistic, athletic, and overwhelmingly charismatic. The film's focus wasn't on the grim realities of poverty or the complexities of class warfare. It was on adventure, romance, and the sheer joy of movement. Fairbanks gave the world a Robin Hood, who was less a social revolutionary and more the world's first action hero. He sanitized the legend in a different way than the Victorians, not by making him noble, but by making him fun. He was safe, he was thrilling, and he was a box office sensation. But the definitive, soul-stirring version of the outlaw was yet to come. It would arrive in 1938, in a burst of glorious technicolor. As the world teetered on the brink of another great war, as the shadows of fascism spread across Europe, Warner Brothers released The Adventures of Robin Hood. And in the lead role, an actor who seemed born to play the part, Errol Flynn. This wasn't just a movie, it was a statement. It was a technicolor dream of freedom in a world turning gray with tyranny. Flynn's Robin Hood is, for millions, the only Robin Hood. He is witty, arrogant, and utterly charming, laughing in the face of danger. He doesn't just fight the Normans, he mocks them, he outsmarts them, he makes them look like fools. This was the perfect hero for an America emerging from the Great Depression and staring down the threat of totalitarianism. The villains, Prince John and Basil Rathbone sneering Sir Guy of Gisborne, weren't just greedy nobles. They were coded as fascists. They preached order while practicing oppression. They demanded loyalty while crushing dissent. They squeezed the common man dry with crippling taxes. When Robin Hood stands up in the Great Hall and declares his rebellion, he isn't just a petty outlaw. He is a freedom fighter. He is an anti-fascist, defending the very soul of England. The movie Sherwood Forest is an idyllic paradise, a democratic haven in the heart of a dictatorship. And it was this film that forever burned the motto into the public consciousness: robbing from the rich to give to the poor. It was a populist New Deal message wrapped in medieval fantasy. Errol Flynn gave the world a Robin Hood who wasn't just fighting for a king, but for an idea, the idea that no one, no prince, no sheriff has the right to oppress the people. It was so powerful, so perfect for its time that it became the template. For decades, every Robin Hood would live in the shadow of Errol Flynn's confident smile and Lincoln green tights. But as the world changed, so did the outlaw. The clear-cut moral certainty of World War II gave way to the paranoia and suspicion of the Cold War. Suddenly, a man who lives in a commune in the woods, redistributes wealth, and defies the state, well, he started to look a little suspicious to some. The legend took on a new subversive edge. This was perfectly captured in the story behind the hugely popular 1950s British TV series, The Adventures of Robin Hood. The show itself was a fairly straightforward adventure series, but its creation was an act of pure rebellion. Its main writers were American screenwriters who had been blacklisted in Hollywood during the McCarthy-era communist witch hunts. Forced out of work in the States, they moved to England and wrote for the show under pseudonyms. Here were men, accused of being enemies of the state, secretly writing the story of a man declared an enemy of the state. They were using the legend of Robin Hood to subtly critique the very injustice that had upended their lives. The story of the outlaw became a shield for real-life outcasts fighting their own Sheriff of Nottingham, the House Un-American Activities Committee. The legend was once again a weapon for the marginalized. Then came the disillusionment of the 1960s and 70s, the Vietnam War, Watergate, a generation questioning all forms of authority. The simple, smiling hero of the Errol Flynn era no longer felt true. The world needed a different kind of Robin Hood, one who was older, wearier, and touched by the scars of his long fight. And so, in 1976 we got Robin and Marian. Sean Connery, the definitive James Bond, now played a middle-aged Robin Hood returning from the Crusades. He's not a dashing hero. He's a broken man. He finds Sherwood a shadow of its former self, his merry men old and tired, and Maid Marian, played by the luminous Audrey Hepburn, a nun. The film is a quiet, melancholic masterpiece. It deconstructs the myth, asking a painful question: what happens after the adventure? What is the human cost of a life of violence? This Robin Hood finds that his legend has become a prison, and that the world has no place for an aging outlaw. It was a hero for a cynical age, a story that suggested that victories are never permanent, and even the greatest legends must eventually face their end. But you can't keep a good legend down. As the cynicism of the 70s gave way to the blockbuster bombast of the 80s and 90s, Robin Hood was due for a comeback. And he got one in a big, loud, and spectacularly successful way. In 1991, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves exploded into theaters. Starring Kevin Costner at the absolute peak of his movie star power, this was Robin Hood for the MTV generation. It was epic, it was action-packed, and it had a chart-topping rock ballad. Costner's Robin was, controversially, an American-accented outlaw, a clear signal that the character was no longer just an English folk hero. He was global intellectual property. This film tried to blend the swashbuckling fun of the Flynn era with the gritty realism that audiences now expected. But its most significant contribution was the introduction of Morgan Freeman as Azim, a Moorish warrior who accompanies Robin back to England. This was a radical change, an acknowledgement of a more multicultural world. It broadened the scope of the legend, suggesting that the fight for justice wasn't just a local English squabble, but a universal struggle. From the silent-era acrobat to the anti-fascist icon, from the subversive blacklist writer to the melancholy veteran, and finally to the blockbuster action hero, the 20th century didn't just retell the story. It forged a new Robin Hood for each generation, each one a mirror reflecting the hopes, fears, and politics of its time. The outlaw of Sherwood had become a vessel, a timeless symbol poured into the mold of the present moment. And this shape-shifting ability is the key to his survival, the very thing that would carry him into the chaos and complexity of the 21st century. And so, the Outlaw of Sherwood steps out of the forest and into the blinding glare of the digital age. But what place is there for a man with a longbow in a world of fiber optics? What does it mean to rob from the rich and give to the poor, when wealth is no longer a chest of gold coins, but a string of code on a server, an abstraction of ones and zeros bouncing between satellites? The truth is, Robin Hood is more relevant now than he has been in centuries, because the fundamental conflicts he represents, injustice, inequality, the abuse of power, have not vanished. They've simply changed their clothes. The new Sherwood Forest isn't made of oak and yew, but of silicon and light, an endless digital frontier we call the internet. And in its darkest corners, a new breed of outlaw has emerged. They don't wear Lincoln green. They hide behind avatars and walls of encryption. They are the hacktivists, groups like Anonymous who, with their Guy Fawkes masks and decentralized structure, operate like a modern-day band of merry men. They don't waylay tax collectors on the road. They launch cyber attacks against corporations and governments they deem corrupt. Their weapon isn't the quarterstaff, it's the DDoS attack. Their stolen goods aren't gold florins. They are sensitive documents, emails, and data, the currency of power in the 21st century. When WikiLeaks published classified government information, or when hackers expose the financial dealings of the global elite, they are acting on a profoundly Robin Hood-esque impulse to take what the powerful have hidden and give it to the public, the poor in knowledge, in the name of transparency and justice. But this immediately throws us back into our central question. Are they heroes, champions of truth fighting a tyrannical system? Or are they criminals, recklessly endangering national security and individual privacy? The debate rages and both sides see their truth. The Sheriff of Nottingham would call them traitors. The peasants of Nottingham might call them saviors. This dynamic exploded into the physical world in 2011. In the shadow of Wall Street, a protest movement was born, Occupy. Its slogan was a rallying cry that echoed across the centuries. We are the 99%. It was a direct, powerful indictment of a system where a tiny fraction of the population, the 1%, controlled a vast and disproportionate amount of the world's wealth. The protesters in Zuccotti Park may not have looked like medieval outlaws, but their grievance was identical to that of the oppressed Saxon villagers. The sheriff was no longer a single petty nobleman. It was a vast, faceless financial system. Prince John wasn't a greedy monarch. It was corporate greed and unchecked capitalism. The taxes weren't levied on grain and livestock. They were subprime mortgages, predatory loans, and government bailouts for banks deemed too big to fail. Occupy Wall Street was a modern peasants' revolt, and the ghost of Robin Hood walked among them, his name invoked as a symbol of righteous rebellion against an unjust economic order. And then, a decade later, the battle moved back into the digital realm, but with a real-world financial punch that no one saw coming. It was the GameStop saga. On one side, you had the giants of Wall Street, the massive hedge funds, the modern barons and sheriffs, who had placed enormous bets that the struggling video game retailer would fail. On the other, a scattered, anonymous army of small-time retail investors, coordinating in a Reddit forum called Wall Street Bets. They were the digital merry men. Using commission-free trading apps, they organized a mass buying campaign, driving the price of GameStop stock to astronomical heights. It was a direct assault on the financial Goliaths. For every dollar the stock went up, the hedge funds lost billions. This wasn't about profit for many of the investors. It was about sending a message. It was about rebellion. They were using the system's own tools against it, a digital quarterstaff to bloody the nose of the financial elite. News headlines framed it as a classic David versus Goliath, a Robin Hood tale for the meme stock generation. They were, in a very real sense, taking money from the ultra-rich hedge funds. Whether that money ended up with the poor is debatable, but the spirit of the act, a defiant collective uprising against a powerful and seemingly unbeatable foe, was pure, unadulterated Sherwood. But Robin Hood's modern identity is not just economic. His symbol is so potent, so flexible, that it's claimed by opposing ideologies. To some, he is a proto-socialist, a champion of wealth redistribution and social safety nets, the ultimate icon for those who believe the state should intervene to correct inequality. He is the patron saint of a progressive tax code. Yet to others he is the exact opposite. He is a libertarian hero, an individualist standing against a bloated, tyrannical government that overtaxes and overregulates its citizens. In this reading, the sheriff isn't a cruel aristocrat, but the IRS. Robin Hood isn't redistributing wealth. He's simply taking back what the government unjustly stole in the first place. He becomes a symbol for tax protesters and anti-government movements. The fact that both a socialist and a libertarian can see themselves in the man in green tights is the ultimate testament to the legend's enduring power. He is a mirror, reflecting the anxieties of whoever looks into it. This brings us to the sharpest edge of the modern dilemma, where the line between hero and criminal is not just blurred, but practically erased. Consider the whistleblower. Figures like Edward Snowden, who leaked classified documents revealing the extent of global surveillance programs run by the US government. To his supporters, he is the ultimate hero, a man who sacrificed his freedom to inform the public that their own government was spying on them. He stole secrets from the powerful, the state, and gave them to the poor, the citizenry. It is the Robin Hood archetype in its most dramatic modern form. But to the government and its supporters, he is a criminal of the highest order. A traitor who compromised national security, endangered intelligence agents, and gave aid and comfort to the enemy. He broke the law. He fled justice. There is no ambiguity in their assessment. He is a villain. So which is he? A hero who broke the law for a higher moral purpose? Or a criminal who betrayed his country? The question hangs in the air, unresolved, dividing nations and families. Snowden's story, and others like it, forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that sometimes the titles of hero and criminal are not mutually exclusive. Sometimes they can inhabit the very same person at the very same time. And that is where the legend of Robin Hood leaves us, here in the 21st century. He is not a simple character from a children's story anymore. He is the masked hacktivist, the Wall Street protester, the Reddit investor, the controversial whistleblower. He is the embodiment of our deepest questions about justice, fairness, and the law. He forces us to ask, when is breaking the law the right thing to do? Does a noble end ever justify criminal means? And who gets to decide? For over 700 years we have wrestled with his legend, reshaping him in our own image, using him to fight our own battles. But we have never truly answered the fundamental question. After all this time, after all the ballads, books, and blockbusters, we are still left to wonder about the man in the green hood. We have seen the myth. We have seen the history. We have seen his reflection in our own chaotic world. Now it is time to render a verdict. So let's place him in the dock. Let's weigh the evidence. On one side of the scale we place the law, the cold, hard, unyielding letter of the law. From this perspective, the verdict is immediate and it is damning. Robin Hood was a criminal. There is no ambiguity here. He was a thief leading a band of thieves. He trespassed on royal land, he poached the king's deer, an act punishable by death. He engaged in kidnapping and ransom, holding wealthy churchmen and nobles captive until his demands were met. He was a highwayman, an outlaw who lived outside the protection and the authority of the crown. He used violence or the threat of it to achieve his ends. The arrows in the quivers of the merry men were not for show. They were weapons used to intimidate, to enforce his will, and when necessary, to kill. The Sheriff of Nottingham, so often painted as a sniveling, cartoonish villain, was simply a man doing his job. He was the appointed agent of law and order. His mandate was to protect property, to ensure the king's peace, and to bring criminals to justice. From his perspective, and from the perspective of any established government in any era, Robin Hood was a domestic terrorist. He was a radical and anarchist, a force of chaos undermining the very structure of society. He rejected the courts, he rejected the hierarchy, he rejected the entire legal framework upon which his world was built. If you believe that society functions because of its laws, and that those laws must be respected for civilization to endure, then Robin Hood is not a hero. He is the problem. He is the breakdown of order. He is guilty. Case closed. But then we place a different weight on the other side of the scale. It's not a law book. It's a human heart. It is the concept of justice. And suddenly the scales begin to shift. The law, as Robin Hood's story so powerfully argues, is not always the same as what is right. The laws he broke were themselves instruments of a brutal, deeply unjust system. A system where peasants starved while lords and bishops feasted. A A system where a man could lose his hands for stealing a loaf of bread to feed his family. A system where the taxes levied by an absent king and a greedy prince were crushing the life out of the common people. In this context, Robin's crimes transform. Poaching the king's deer is no longer simple theft. It is an act of defiance. It's feeding the hungry with the bounty of the land that should belong to everyone. Robbing a gluttonous abbot is not just highway robbery. It is a radical, forceful redistribution of wealth. It is taking from those who have far too much, not for personal gain but to give to those who have nothing. His violence was not random. It was a targeted response to the systemic violence of poverty and oppression. He didn't create the chaos, he was a reaction to it. He was the consequence of a society that had forgotten its duty to its most vulnerable. From this viewpoint, the sheriff isn't a lawman. He is the enforcer of an immoral regime. And Robin Hood is not a criminal. He is a freedom fighter. He is a resistance leader. He is the first social justice warrior, armed with a longbow and an unshakable moral compass. He represents a higher law, a natural law, that says human dignity and survival are more important than a nobleman's property rights. He gave the people something more valuable than stolen gold. He gave them hope. He was the living proof that the powerful were not invincible, that the system could be challenged, and that one person standing for what is right could make a difference. In the court of human morality, Robin Hood is not just innocent. He is a saint. So which is it? Is he the criminal of the law, or the hero of justice? The truth, the reason this legend has gripped us for nearly 1,000 years, is that he is both. He must be both. The legend's power is born from this very paradox. He is the righteous criminal, the noble outlaw, the man who had to break the law in order to uphold it. His story forces us to confront the most uncomfortable and vital questions about our own society. When does a law cease to be just? At what point does obedience become complicity? When does defiance become a moral obligation? Think about it. The founders of the United States of America were, in the eyes of the British Empire, criminals. They were traitors, smugglers, and seditious rebels. They broke the king's laws, refused to pay their taxes, and waged a violent war against established authority. Yet, in America, they are revered as heroes, as patriots who fought for a higher ideal of liberty. Throughout history, the line between criminal and hero is often drawn by the victor, or by the passage of time. Figures who fought for civil rights in the 1960s deliberately broke segregation laws. They were arrested, jailed, and branded as criminals by the state. Today, we build monuments to them. Robin Hood is the timeless archetype of this exact dilemma. He is the patron saint of righteous disobedience. He is the story we tell ourselves to remember that the status quo is not divine, that our laws are man-made and therefore fallible, that our leaders are human and therefore corruptible. The legend of Robin Hood is a cultural safety valve, a reminder that when the system becomes the oppressor, the outlaw can become the hero. And that is why he is immortal. The man, whether he was a yeoman named Robert Hood or a dispossessed earl, is lost to the mists of time. But the idea of him is more real and more relevant than ever. Because Sherwood Forest is not just a place. It's a state of mind. It is the refuge for the outcast, the haven for the oppressed. The Sheriff of Nottingham is not just one man. He is any face of intransigent, cruel authority. And Robin Hood is the spark of rebellion that lives in the heart of anyone who has ever looked at the world and thought, "This isn't right." He is the whistleblower exposing corporate or government corruption, branded a traitor by the powerful but hailed as a hero by the public. He is the hacktivist who breaks through digital firewalls to leak information, committing a crime to serve what they see as a greater good. He is the protester standing in the street, breaking a curfew to demand justice, an outlaw in the eyes of the police, a hero to their community. The green tunic has been replaced by a hoodie, the longbow by a laptop, but the spirit remains unchanged. So the final verdict, hero or criminal? To ask the question is to miss the point. You cannot have one without the other. His criminality is what makes him a hero. His heroism is what makes him a criminal. He occupies the gray space between the world as it is and the world as it ought to be. He is a fiction, a legend, a composite of 100 ballads and 1,000 dreams. But he is also one of the most essential truths we have. A truth that says that justice is not something that is given to you from on high. It is something that must be demanded, fought for, and if necessary, taken. The legend of Robin Hood doesn't end with his death at Kirklees Abbey. It doesn't end at all. It is a story that is still being written every single day, in every corner of the world where people stand up against overwhelming power. The final verdict on Robin Hood is not a judgment on a man who may or may not have lived 8 centuries ago. It is a question we must ask ourselves. When we see injustice, do we obey the law? Or do we listen to our conscience? Do we side with the sheriff or do we ride with the outlaw? The legend of Robin Hood isn't just his story. It's the story of a choice that falls to every single one of us. And in that choice, we decide what kind of world we want to live in. The man may be a myth, but his challenge is very, very real.